August 12, 1940. Lympner Airfield, Kent. A Messerschmitt Bf 109E lifts from a forward operating strip near Calais in the pre-dawn dark, its Daimler-Benz DB601 engine surging to full power. The pilot, an experienced Jagdflieger with kills painted beneath his cockpit, barely registers the faint discoloration on the rubber sealant around his port wing fuel tank. There is nothing obviously wrong, nothing to suggest what is already in motion. Somewhere inside that tank, soaked into the gasket material beneath the access panel, a network of tiny fibers has been doing its quiet, patient work for weeks. The rubber is swelling, invisibly, irreversibly. The aircraft climbs through 2,000 meters. The pilot banks east over the channel, satisfied. Then the pressure differential changes as he levels out, and the sealant, already compromised, gives way with a sudden catastrophic split. Petrol courses across the hot exhaust manifold. The fire that follows is instantaneous and total. There will be no Mayday transmission. There will be no body recovered from the channel. There will only be a notation in a Luftwaffe maintenance log, cause unknown, suspected manufacturing defect, and the quiet, unremarkable continuation of a campaign that the Germans never fully understood was being fought against them from the inside. This is not the story of bombers or fighter aces or radar stations. This is the story of a fibre, a plant, a single industrial material so commonplace that it was used in carpet backing and rope making and agricultural sacking across Britain for generations. And somehow, in the hands of a small, secretive department buried inside the wartime British government, this ordinary substance became one of the most precise and deniable weapons of the entire air war. The story of how British flax-derived fibre brought down Messerschmitts and why the Luftwaffe never suspected the truth remains one of the most underappreciated chapters of the Second World War. To understand what made this possible, you have to understand the state of the Bf 109E's fuel system in 1940 and why it was a system already under pressure before a single saboteur ever touched it. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E, the dominant variant flown during the Battle of France and the opening phases of the Battle of Britain, carried its fuel in 2 wing tanks and a fuselage tank with a combined capacity of roughly 400 litres. The engine itself, the remarkable Daimler-Benz DB601A, produced approximately 1,175 horsepower at full throttle and consumed petrol at a rate that gave the aircraft a combat radius of only around 170 kilometers from the English coast when flying from the Pas de Calais. This was already a critical strategic weakness. But the tanks themselves introduced a second, less obvious vulnerability. Luftwaffe procurement, working at pace through the mid-1930s expansion period, had standardized on a particular type of synthetic rubber compound for the gasket sealing material used around tank access panels and fuel line connections. The material was adequate under normal operating conditions. It was resistant to standard aviation fuel. It was dimensionally stable in moderate temperature ranges. What it was not, as German engineers would have discovered had they tested it more thoroughly, was resistant to prolonged contact with certain plant-based solvents or swelling agents. The molecular structure of the compound had a specific weakness, a chemical susceptibility that the right type of fibre, properly treated, could exploit over a period of weeks or months of ordinary storage. This vulnerability had in fact been identified in captured German aircraft samples as early as 1938. A team of chemists at the Chemical Defence Experimental Station at Porton Down in Wiltshire had been studying Luftwaffe material samples obtained through diplomatic and intelligence channels, and a junior scientist whose name does not appear in any publicly available record noted in a report now partially declassified that the sealant compound showed measurable degradation when exposed to treated linen fibre in controlled laboratory conditions. The report was filed. It was read. And then, for nearly 18 months, nothing happened. What changed everything was Dunkirk and the sudden, sickening clarity that Britain stood alone. In the summer of 1940, as the Battle of Britain intensified and Fighter Command began losing pilots faster than they could be replaced, a small operational planning group within the Special Operations Executive, formally constituted on July 22, 1940 by Churchill's direct instruction, began to revisit every available means of disrupting Luftwaffe operational capacity without committing further men or aircraft. The Porton Down report was retrieved from its filing cabinet. A scientist named Dr. Harold Fenwick, a textile chemist from Bradford who had spent the previous decade working on industrial flax processing for the carpet trade, was brought into a series of meetings that, on the official record, appear only as consultations on textile procurement for wartime industries. Fenwick's contribution was not dramatic. It was methodical, practical, and extraordinarily precise. Flax, Linum usitatissimum, had been cultivated in Britain for over 4,000 years. By 1940, the linen industry in Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland was processing millions of tons of the plant annually, drawing the long bast fibres from the retted stalks and spinning them into thread, rope, sailcloth, and industrial fabric. The fibres themselves, at the microscopic level, are hollow capillaries. They absorb and release moisture. They can be treated with chemical agents that remain stable for weeks during storage, but become active when exposed to specific solvent conditions. Fenwick's insight, which sounds almost absurdly simple when stated plainly, was that treated flax fibre, woven into a standard gasket packing material that was visually indistinguishable from normal industrial hemp cord, would behave exactly as conventional packing during storage, transit, and installation, and then, once in sustained contact with aviation fuel, would begin to swell, saturate, and ultimately mechanically compromise the synthetic rubber compound pressed against it. The mechanism worked in 3 stages. First, the treated fibre absorbed the aromatic components of aviation fuel through its hollow capillaries. Second, the swelling agent in the fibre's treatment coating migrated into the surrounding sealant rubber under the mechanical pressure of the gasket joint. Third, the rubber began to plasticize, to soften and expand at a molecular level, until the dimensional tolerance of the joint was destroyed, and the seal failed under operational pressure. From initial installation to seal failure, the process took between 3 and 8 weeks, depending on temperature, fuel composition, and how frequently the aircraft flew. It was, in every meaningful sense, a delayed action weapon that left no identifiable trace. Production began at a facility in Londonderry in the autumn of 1940, operating under the cover of a legitimate wartime textile contract. The treated fibre packing cord, outwardly identical in every measurable quality to standard 4mm hemp gasket cord sold throughout European industrial markets, was produced in batches of several hundred kilograms at a time. It was then distributed through a network of neutral intermediaries in Portugal, Spain, and Sweden, inserted into the legitimate supply chains that the Luftwaffe's procurement system drew upon for maintenance materials. German Air Force technical units, operating under constant pressure to maintain serviceability rates, were not in the habit of testing routine consumable materials beyond visual inspection. They fitted the cord, they sealed the tanks, they signed the maintenance logs, and they moved on to the next aircraft. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Assessing operational results with any precision is difficult because the entire program was designed to produce failures that looked accidental. The Luftwaffe's own accident investigation, reports from the 1940 to 1942 period, show a statistically elevated rate of fuel system failures, attributed to manufacturing defects and material fatigue, particularly in units operating from forward airstrips in France and the Low Countries, where resupply chains were longer and material controls looser. Estimates from post-war intelligence assessments, available in partially declassified form at the National Archives at Kew, suggest that between 60 and 120 aircraft losses over the entire period of the programme's operation may be attributable to fuel system compromise of this type, though the exact figure is genuinely unknown and may never be established with certainty. Some of those aircraft would have been lost to combat damage in any case. Others represent genuine additional attrition. What the operational records do show, in the maintenance logs of several Jägerschwader units, is a pattern of grounding orders issued for fuel system inspections during 1941 and 1942 as Luftwaffe technical officers became increasingly suspicious of unexplained seal failures. These inspections found nothing. The treated fibre, once it had done its work, was indistinguishable from degraded material of any cause. The Germans checked their manufacturing processes, reviewed their rubber compound specifications, and ultimately attributed the problem to quality control failures in wartime production. They never looked at the cord. It is worth comparing the British approach to German efforts in the same field, because the contrast is instructive. German sabotage operations against British aviation did exist. The Abwehr ran several programs aimed at disrupting RAF maintenance supply chains, but they operated primarily through human agents placing devices or contaminants directly and overtly. The most significant German effort, Operation Lena, focused on inserting agents to report on airfield activity rather than degrade aircraft systems through supply chain infiltration. German technical intelligence, whilst formidable in many areas, did not develop a comparable program of chemically enhanced passive sabotage using industrial materials. The Abwehr was thinking in terms of bombs and spies. The SOE was thinking in terms of chemistry and patience. The American OSS, when it began its own sabotage material program after entering the war in late 1941, drew heavily on British methods, and in several documented cases adopted the fibre treatment approach directly, adapting it for use against Axis logistics vehicles and aircraft in the Mediterranean theatre. American researchers at Camp David's technical section corresponded with British counterparts throughout 1942 and 1943, and the resulting OSS field manual for supply chain sabotage, portions of which were declassified in the 1990s, contains explicit reference to textile-based chemical delay mechanisms derived from British wartime experience. The technique was, in other words, good enough to be copied and extended by the most technically sophisticated ally Britain possessed. The honest assessment of what the fibre programme achieved is this: it was never decisive. No single programme won the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe was defeated in the air by fighter command's pilots, by radar, by organisation, by the German High Command's strategic errors, and by the sheer human cost that Goering's air fleets paid over English skies throughout those summer and autumn months. The fibre programme did not win the battle, but it contributed, in its quiet and deniable way, to a cumulative attrition that a Luftwaffe already overstretched could not easily absorb. An aircraft grounded for an unexplained fuel system failure is an aircraft that is not bombing a radar station. A pilot killed in a fuel fire over the Channel is a pilot who is not available for the next day's sortie. The mathematics of attrition, in the close-run thing that the Battle of Britain truly was, meant that every aircraft removed from the operational equation by any means had value. Dr. Harold Fenwick survived the war. He returned to Bradford and the textile industry. His contribution to the war effort appears nowhere in his published obituary from 1971. The facility in Londonderry that produced the treated cord reverted to civilian production in 1943, when the program was scaled back as the strategic situation changed and access to Luftwaffe supply chains became more restricted. The Porton Down chemist who first identified the vulnerability in 1938, whose name, frustratingly, is still redacted in the partially declassified report, presumably went on to other work. None of them received public recognition. That was, of course, the point. Physical examples of the treated cord are not, to any publicly available knowledge, held in museum collections. The material is indistinguishable from ordinary industrial hemp packing without chemical analysis, and no known sample has been positively identified and accessioned. The documentary record exists primarily in the National Archives, spread across SOE files in the HS series and technical intelligence reports in the AIR series, many of which remain partially or fully closed. Researchers working in this area find themselves navigating a silence that is partly deliberate and partly simply the ordinary entropy of wartime record-keeping. And that silence is, in its own way, the final proof of the program's success. Return to that Bf 109E over the Channel, the pilot who never knew what had been done to his aircraft, or by whom, or when. The Luftwaffe maintenance officer who wrote "manufacturing defect" in a log and moved on. The British chemist who read a report about capillary absorption and realized that the most effective weapon available to a nation fighting for its life was not always the one that exploded. What the fibre program demonstrated was a principle of warfare that is both ancient and perpetually undervalued. That the most dangerous attacks are the ones that look like accidents. That the supply chain is always a battlefield. That a nation which cannot match its enemy in aircraft production can still reach inside that enemy's machines and introduce uncertainty, doubt, and failure at the molecular level. The Luftwaffe flew its sorties. It recorded its losses. It investigated its failures and found nothing. Meanwhile, in a textile mill in Northern Ireland, women who thought they were making rope were manufacturing, by the tens of thousands of meters, a weapon more subtle than anything mounted on a Spitfire's wings. Germany sent its best pilots. Britain sent its chemistry. The fibre held the line. If you liked my video, please share your opinion in the comments box and subscribe to the channel. Also, turn on the bell icon so that the latest videos like this keep reaching you. See you in the next video. Take care and goodbye.